and repeat them for you? So let's dive straight into this information-packed lesson and see the magic of Excel. Hello, and a very big warm welcome to this lesson of Mighty Macros. In this lesson, we have three main objectives. First and foremost, we'll introduce you to what macros are and how they work. Then we'll move on to practicing macros. And last but not least, we'll integrate other functions while we're using macros too. So let's see, what exactly are those macros? According to Microsoft Excel, the definition of a macro is an action or set of actions that you can run as many times as you want. But what does this mean? When you create a macro, you're recording your mouse clicks and your keystrokes. But the best is, after you've created a macro, you can always edit it and make minor changes to the way that it works. So basically, if we still had tasks in Excel we want to do repeatedly, we can record a macro to automate all of those tasks and make sure that Excel does it for you. But did you know that Excel actually introduced macros in 1978? Yes, that's more than 30 years ago. But of course, many changes have been placed on it since then. Did you know that Excel owes a part of its success to this powerful tool? Although, this tool is not very common for the normal user. But for those with a little bit more knowledge about Excel, macros have been the perfect feature in order to reduce the amount of all those mundane activities. Technically, macros are the execution speed of a program format. Every time you hear about macros, you're more than likely to hear the word VBA, or Visual Basics for Applications. But you should not get confused. They are two completely different things, even though they are related. The VBA is a programming language which is used to create the macros. But don't worry about that at the moment. All we need to know for now is that macros are not a programming language. They are a sequence of instructions that automizes some activities on Excel. And those activities are those that we want Excel to do for us in order to get a specific result. Now there's many different advantages, but just a few of them is macros allows us to do repetitive tasks only using one or two buttons. We can automate all these repetitive tasks, and this helps us to save time. And another benefit is you can use simple names for several statements. So let's think about a real-life example. Let's say shopping. I would like you to think about possibly the most repetitive task in your daily life. We go to the supermarket maybe once or maybe even twice a week. And every time we have to make a shopping list. This shopping list allows us not to forget anything. So you probably take out your pen and paper and start writing down all the missing product. Some of you may do it directly on your phone. But when you are doing this, you probably have to think about what you're going to eat during the week and review all the recipes. Maybe you're on a diet, or you have specific dietary requirements. Maybe you go look in the fridge and you see the milk is finished. But either way, you keep checking to see exactly what you need. Maybe you go to the fridge and notice you didn't even realize that there was no milk. And last but not least, you review all the cleaning products. To put it all into perspective, if you are shopping once a week, this means that you're doing it more than 52 times a year. So imagine if you had the magic of Excel and the function of macros to help us to do these repetitive tasks. And we can simply do this by clicking one or two buttons. So let's say you take your shopping list and then what you need already comes up because macros has done all the other steps for you. Macros of Excel is not going to do your shopping list unless you make your notes in Excel. You can maybe have an inventory on a different workbook and the Excel can review the minimums and the maximums of each product. But even so, you may have to type that inventory list in manually, and this may take some time. But not to worry. For those of you who are fascinated in technology, there are a few smart fridges coming out in the market. Perhaps that will be the future. But for now, we are going to be working on Excel. So coming back to our topic of macros. I hope this example already gave you a little bit of a better idea of what macros does. But most importantly, how it can simplify your work in Excel. So let's go over to Excel and see the magic in action. So first and foremost, to use macros, we need to use the Developer tab. You may also use this tab at a later stage to work with all the VBAs. But for now, let's focus on the macros. Generally, the developer tab is hidden. So in order to visualize it, we need to go to our tab in our data ribbon. But the first thing we need to do is actually to enable it. So to enable this, we can go over to our Customize Quick Access toolbar. We go to More Commands. We need to make sure that we're customizing our ribbon, and when we customize our ribbon, we click on Developer. So we want to have the code, the add-ins, the controls, and the MXL, and click OK. This will allow the ribbon to have your developer tab on it too. And remember, if you don't want it there, you can always take it away too. So simply by going to your quick access and reversing all the steps you took before. But now that we know a little bit more about how we get our developer tab, let's go over to recording macros. So let's have a look at our steps. Of course, we need to first make sure that our developer tool is actually opened. Once it's opened, we go to side to record macros. We can always replay our macros and then stop our macros too. But now let's see exactly how do we record a macro. So here we can see we have a large data set in front of us. So let's say you work at a university and each week you get a report with this database, which provides you an update on the student's personal information. It shows you many different things, such as their health status, social activities, absences, and so on. But now the problem is, every time we get this file from the database, we need to make a lot of changes in order to do the reporting. But there's no need to worry, because as we get it weekly, we can run our macro weekly too. So in our developer tab, we're going to go over to the side where it says code, and we're going to run our macro. So first and foremost, we'll start with record macro. Then of course, we need to call our macro something. That's the best way to identify it. So let's say we're going to call it demo and student report. Remember, you can always add a description. So you can always say weekly formatting, and that way you'll know exactly what your macro does. Once you're satisfied, click OK. And you will see you now have the option for stop recording, but we haven't even started just yet. So let's say first and foremost, we want to start off by making sure that everything is a nice table. Can you remember your shortcut for this? We said Control T, and then you'll see your data range. Click OK. Now you have a table, and it's easy to work through your data too. Another example could be, let's say we want the heading to be in yellow instead of white. Now that we have all our information here, we want to go to the end and make sure that there are no commas. Of course, if you're absent, you can't be absent for half a day. You were either there or you were not. So we select our data and format our cells. Do you know the shortcut for this? If we press Ctrl 1, it will open our dialog box to format our cells. Go over to number and make sure that there are no decimal places. Now that we have all of this information, let's say we quickly want to see who their guardian is. Is it their mother or their father? So we can simply do this by either having an M or an F. So we'll do that by going to Find and Select. And of course we want to replace. So we want to replace mother with the letter M. So let's start with finding all and then saying replace all. Then we can see they've made all the replacements and close. And of course you can do exactly the same with father too. So when we have our father, then we can always replace it with a capital F. And this makes it a lot easier for us to find all of our information, as it's nice and neat and simple. And then we can close it once again. Now that we've edited our data, to make it a lot simpler and easier for us to work with, we can go back to our developer tab and stop recording our macro. If you want to see the macros which you have recorded, you can either press Alt F8 or you can click on Macros button. And here we can see our macro which has been created. Now let's say there are a few changes which we needed to make and we didn't make them. So we can always edit our macro too. When we edit our macro, a new screen will appear. And this will show you the coding for that macro. This code captures every single one of your mouse clicks, and it sees exactly what you're doing. So for example, if we have a look at the different lines, if we go all the way back up to the top, then we can see our entire macro. So if you want to add a heading to your macro for every step, so to add a heading, you need to have an apostrophe. And then let's say we created our table. And as we can see there, we created the table shortly after in our macro. And you can do exactly the same thing here. So apostrophe, and we changed the names to M and F. And this gives us the title once again. And you'll see it will be highlighted in green. Now, even though this code may look a little bit overwhelming, there's no need for us really to use the code. This is just so that you have a little bit more information and you know exactly what's going on in the back. Because like we did say, it's part of programming. So then you can click Save. But remember, you have to have the correct format in which you've saved your file. So we'll give you the option in order to resave your file, enabling macros. And then you can close the tab. So now let's see. Do you think our macros actually worked? So let's open a new tab and say that we just got a new list. So let's enter all our data here. Now remember, we want to run our macros. So we go back to our developer tool and we can pick our macro out of the macros which you've created. So now here you can see that you've run your macro and all the changes have been applied exactly as you want them to be. So this brings us to the last topic of this lesson. And we'll look at how we can use different functions while running our macros at the same time. So let's go back over to Excel. So every single month, your manager gives you this exact same spreadsheet. Here we can see that we have the customers' names and we have the purchase orders too. So your manager wants this to be in exactly the same format every month. Now, as we all know, time is extremely precious and we definitely don't want to waste it. So we can simply run a macro to make sure that as we're getting this sheet every month, we can just run it once again and the format will already be applied. So let's go over to our developer tool and record our macro. So this time we want to say client report. But now did you know that you can't have a space in the name? You need to use the underscore in order to create that space. Then you can also add monthly report so it tells us exactly what this macro does. And click OK. And now as we can see, the macro has started recording. So firstly, we want to make sure that we have another column as we want to have our first names and our last names separated. So we'll say first names in the first one and last names in the next. And the purchase order remains exactly the same. Now, of course, we can go and we can click each and every first name and last name and put it over to the next column. Or we can go over to our data tab and say text to columns. We'll say next, and here we can see it's separated by a space. Click on the block to say, yes, we want to separate it by the space. Say next, and finished. Nice and simple, now the names and surnames are separated. We also want to convert this into a table. It just makes it a lot easier to see. So using your Ctrl-T, it will select your range and press OK. Once you're happy with your table, we want to see which purchase orders are higher than 600. So we go back to our Home tab, select Conditional Formatting, highlight our cell rules, greater than 600, and then we want it to be filled with red and dark text, and say OK. Now that we're satisfied with all our information and we're able to view it a lot more clearer, thanks to all the formatting, we can end our macro. Going back to developer and say stop recording. Now that we have our macro saved, let's see it in action. So we go over to our original data, say macros, we want that client report and say run. And we can see this work beautifully. But now what would happen if we get our information and it's not exactly the same way as it was before? Excel specifically wants to copy what you did. So therefore your information actually needs to be in the same place. But there's no need to worry. You can simply start by clicking on A1 and use relative reference. When you use your relative reference, you can go back over to macros and run your macro once again. So now that you've run your macros, you will see that your data appears in the format which you would like it to be in. But now did you know, instead of pressing on Ctrl F8, you can also add a button. So let's go to Insert, but remember this needs to still be in the Developer tool. not insert on your ribbon. So we go to insert and we want to add a button. So when we add that button in a certain space, then we can click on customer report and say OK. Make that button a little bit bigger, it will show us button 1. And now every time you click on that button, your macros will run. So this unfortunately brings us to the end of our lesson. So for our lesson challenge for today, I'd like you to record your very own macro. And the more formatting and changes you make to your worksheet, the better you'll be able to see exactly how powerful the macros are. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson as much as I have. See you next time.